So the secondary data sources include PRISM, which is a mapping, it's a zip code psychographic, basically, program. I think we have talked about before. Basically they have interpreted different lifestyle groups based on income, zip code, age. And so for instance, you have young, hip urbanites, that live in certain zip codes of Manhattan, have certain tendencies. Older, mature retirees who like to hunt and fish, So these are very useful external databases in direct marketing. It's a way to find out more about your current customers if you know their zip code, age, and income. It's not for sure that your specific customer is going to fall into that lifestyle group. It's just sort of an average kind of a thing, but it gives you some ideas anyway. And of course, Axiom is a great source of already compiled data. We've talked a fair amount about Axiom. Now, if you're in a B2B mode, there are a number of good sources for that. Economic census, IRS data, Hoover's is another one. Estimating your market size is actually a pretty good place to start, because you kind of start with the overall market. Is it growing? Is it contracting? What are the trends? And then you move on to who are the competitors who are growing? What are the segments growing within the market? And eventually you come to analysis of your own company and how it's doing, et cetera. So you kind of start very broad with the overall market, and then you work down to segments and companies. Analyzing the competition is also a very important thing to do, and there's lots of secondary research on this. So for instance, for Ocean Spray, you're going to look at other beverage companies or other juice companies probably to start with, because those are the closest competitors. That's the closest product offering to what Ocean Spray has. And how are the other juice companies doing? Who's growing, who isn't, why or why not? And you can find that out from Hoover's. You can find that out from lots of different resources in the library. You can also Google it, of course. And, tea versus fruit, et cetera. You can look at competitive advertising and do a Tabasco for them and kind of see what they're doing and who they're targeting and what they're trying to accomplish with their advertising. Of course, you want to look at market share and general trends. And on an ongoing basis in any business, you want to monitor your competition. That means you want to be able to pull any new advertising they run wherever it appears. And there are actually companies you can hire who will automatically do that for you and send you reports of, show you the advertising and tell you where it ran and when it ran, et cetera, et cetera. And if you have the resources, that's something you're going to want to think about. So secondary research is where you start and get as much as you can from that, and then see what questions you haven't answered. So remember, the overall goal, of course, for Ocean Spray is to increase its appeal, its business level, its share among millennial folks. And so ultimately the question has to be, given what's going on in the market, given what's going on with competitors, given what's going on with Ocean Spray, why is Ocean Spray not as successful as it wants to be with millennials, and what do they have to do to reverse that? And here's where you probably are going to need to do some kind of primary research. Ask people what they like, what they drink, why they drink it, what are the key attributes of a fruit drink or a beverage that appeal to them, et cetera, et cetera. That's where you're going to want to do some primary research. So when we talk about primary research, I usually ask my class whether anyone in the class has ever been contacted by a researcher. And many students have. They've been asked to be in focus groups, and if so, I have them describe kind of what they did, etc. But many of us have already been, or we've been in surveys. I mean, many of us have already done primary research for somebody else. And then, of course, the other question is, have you ever used primary research yourself? And many have in other classes. They've done surveys. etc. How would you use primary research for ocean spray? And then hint, hint, SurveyMonkey is something you might want to think about. You might want to think about personal intercepts also. Now, again, primary data can be costly to get. The ways to get it are observation of behavior. There's surveys, and then you can do experimenting where you might go into a marketplace and introduce a product and kind of see what happens. So you can do mailings, telephone calls, and personal interactions. I'm going to encourage you guys to do some personal interviews, not just SurveyMonkey, because there's some bias in SurveyMonkey because who completes those surveys? Not everybody out there, quote unquote, not every millennial out there is, spending time on SurveyMonkey. It's probably a certain kind of person who even bothers to do that. So there's an inherent bias, if you see what I mean, in using SurveyMonkey. It's people who like to talk. I don't know, people who want to voice their opinions. I don't know, but anyway, some personal interviews I would like to encourage you to do for ocean spray. So again, when we talk about primary research, there's qualitative, quantitative, and in-market testing. Qualitative is focus groups, groups of 10 or 12 or 6 or 8 or whatever. From the target audience, whatever it may be, that are brought together in a room with a moderator. Usually the clients and interested people are behind a two-way mirror. It looks like a mirror from inside the room, but it's a window for those sitting in back eating M&Ms and drinking Diet Coke. And this is directional feedback and idea generation. Now that's strange. Visual you're seeing there is from a presentation of my good friend Bill Gentner, who was the CEO of Kao Corporation. Kao is spelled K-A-O, not C-O-W. It's a Japanese company. One of their big brands is Jergens here, across the world. But they also, my friend Bill, developed Biore strips. And this was a technology that developed in Japan. Some kind of polymer that could be put on a strip of paper that would pull these attractive things out of your face or out of your nose. And Bill has done some guest lecturing for me in the past, and I happen to have this visual. And they started by giving people the product to try, and then discussing it in focus groups and looking at the results, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, it was clear that they had something with that was useful, that people wanted, that had a USP. It's a big success for them, and it still is. Some of you may be familiar with it. But they started with qualitative research just to get a sense of what they had and how people described it, etc. Quantitative is when you go to the larger sample sizes, 50 to 100 minimum to thousands, careful, clear questions that don't bias the answers. If you start by asking someone, what do you think of a product that'll take the blackheads off your face? I mean, it kind of jumps ahead too far. You probably want to start by asking general questions about skincare and what they do now, about certain problems, and sort of move into the area a little more delicately if you really want to find out what people are doing now. Then in-market testing is when you get really expensive. Now, this is when I worked on Procter & Gamble business. We would do this. We would, for instance, take a district, a Nielsen share district, and we used to track our market share, say on Cascade laundry detergent, which I worked on, or excuse me, Cascade dishwasher detergent, which I worked on. It was a while ago, folks. We would say run an advertising heavy up in one district where we would maybe double the spending on TV by buying local TV and local print and double the GRP level, and then run it over 6 months or 12 months and see what effect that had in that city versus a similar district or city where we didn't do it. So this is the one variable kind of thing, and you're actually going to read business results and sales in addition to doing consumer interviews. So in-market testing, when it's changing a product or whatever, is pretty expensive. But you know what? When you're testing, when Twitter wants to see if they can double the size of the amount of words they accept, it's not that expensive to do, if you think about it. So, but very valid. very valid way to find out if something's going to work or not. So data gathered, the observational approach is watching people in either a natural or artificial setting. And here you might watch people in a store to see what they do with your new display. Where do you need to put it for them to see it and notice it, that kind of thing. And you can actually observe people in a store. Surveys we've talked about for descriptive information. Experimental approach is varying a variable and with one group and not with the other and seeing what happens. So we're going to talk a little bit more about focus groups, and there you see one there. And I'm going to stop now, and there are going to be a couple of videos for you to watch about focus groups that you might find interesting, I hope.